Rajendra Raju, Vardhan, the celebrated Dosa King of India, built an empire on flavor and trust, until one night, a half-eaten dosa, a rare banned herb, and the sudden reappearance of Ananya Rao pulled him, Sahil Devraj, and journalist Meera Nandakumar into a deadly game of betrayal, where the truth was more poisonous than the crime itself. Rajendra Raju Vardhan had built his fortune on something simple yet deeply loved across India, the dosa. From a modest street stall in Chennai's crowded market lanes, he had risen to command an empire of luxury restaurants that stretched from the southernmost tip of the country to high-end malls in Delhi and Mumbai. His face, always smiling in advertisements, had become a symbol of authenticity and quality. People called him the Dosa King, and his empire was not just about food. It was about an experience that combined tradition with grandeur. His penthouse in the heart of Chennai reflected his success. Polished marble floors, panoramic glass walls overlooking the city, and a private kitchen fitted with rare cooking equipment imported from Europe. It was the pride of his life, a space where he occasionally cooked for himself when he wanted to relive the humble days of his career. On the night before his death, the city had been unusually quiet. The monsoon clouds that had threatened rain all evening seemed to hold back, leaving the streets dimly lit under flickering yellow lamps. Inside his penthouse, Raju was alone. He had sent his personal staff home earlier than usual, claiming he wanted a quiet night to work on a new recipe. Later, in the early hours of the morning, when the sun had barely begun to rise, the silence of the penthouse was broken by the arrival of his housekeeper. She let herself in as usual, carrying a tray of fresh flowers meant for the dining table. The scent of burnt spices hit her before she even reached the kitchen. She called out for him but got no response. Then, stepping into the dining area, she froze. Raju was lying motionless on the floor near his grand teak dining table. His eyes were open, staring at nothing, and beside his hand was a plate with a half-eaten masala dosa. The crisp outer layer had broken apart, revealing the golden potato filling within, yet its appearance was oddly unappetizing. The air carried a faint, almost bitter smell, as though something had been overcooked or scorched in the preparation. A glass of wine stood untouched on the table. The scene felt wrong, as if something violent had occurred without leaving any visible mark. There was no blood, no overturned furniture, no shattered glass. Everything was in its place, except for the man who had once been the heart of the room. The police arrived quickly, led by Inspector Varun Malhotra. The first survey of the scene raised more questions than answers. There were no signs of forced entry. The security cameras covering the building's main entrance showed no unusual visitors during the night. The penthouse's private elevator was locked from the inside, making it impossible for anyone to come or go without Raju's knowledge. His expensive wristwatch and gold chain were still on his body, ruling out robbery, yet the expression on his face, a frozen combination of shock and discomfort, hinted at something sudden and unexpected. A quick check by the forensic team confirmed that his death had not been caused by physical trauma. It was likely something he had consumed. Word of Raju's death spread through Chennai like wildfire. Outside his restaurants, crowds gathered in disbelief. Customers who had seen him only days earlier found it impossible to accept that their beloved Dosa King was gone. Some whispered that his rivals in the restaurant industry had finally caught up to him. Others speculated about scandals, rumors of secret affairs, hidden debts, and family disputes. Among his loyal staff, there was grief, but also a noticeable tension. A few employees avoided speaking to the police, their faces pale and anxious. The investigation had barely begun, yet the air around the case felt heavy, as though an invisible thread connected Raju's empire to something darker. In the days to follow, every part of his life would be examined. Every person he had trusted would be questioned, and every plate served in his restaurants would come under suspicion. But in that first morning, standing over his lifeless body, the police could only focus on the bitter smell that lingered in the room, the smell of a meal that might have been his last act of creation, or the instrument of his death. The dosa that had made him famous was now at the center of the mystery, and somewhere among the spices and batter, the truth waited to be uncovered. You said, expand, Chapter 2. His years of experience had taught him that in cases without obvious signs of violence, the smallest details often carried the biggest clues. The forensic team had already collected samples from the plate, the batter remnants in the kitchen, and even the wine glass. Preliminary lab reports revealed something unsettling. In Raju's stomach were traces of a rare South Indian herb known locally as karuna. This herb had once been prized for its intense aroma and flavor, but decades ago it was banned across India after researchers linked it to severe liver damage and sudden cardiac arrest. What made the finding even more alarming was that the herb's taste could easily be masked by strong spices, especially those used in a masala dosa. It was the perfect poison for someone who knew how to use it. Varun ordered a full inspection of all the kitchens in Raju's restaurant chain. The search teams moved quickly, seizing spice jars, batter containers, and anything that could have been tampered with. Yet, after hours of combing through storerooms and refrigerators, there was no trace of the banned herb. It was as if it had been introduced into Raju's meal that night, and then vanished without a trace. This led Varun to suspect that whoever was behind the poisoning had access to Raju's personal kitchen rather than the commercial one. That narrowed the suspect pool to people Raju trusted, family members, close friends, or longtime employees. One name kept resurfacing in the initial interviews: Sahil Devraj, Raju's head chef for over 15. Sahil was known for his loyalty and skill in the kitchen, having worked alongside Raju since the earliest days of the business. Many of the signature dishes were his creations, yet in recent months, staff had noticed him becoming unusually withdrawn. When Varun questioned him, Sahil seemed tense, answering in clipped sentences and avoiding eye contact. He admitted to preparing Raju's dinner on the night of his death, but claimed he had left before the meal was served. His alibi for the rest of the night was vague, relying on the statement that he went home and slept. There were no witnesses to confirm it. Varun also looked into the supply chains for the banned herb. Official records showed no legal imports or sales of karunagar in decades, but on the black market, small quantities occasionally surfaced among spice collectors and traditional healers. A confidential source in the city's underground market told the inspector that a batch had been sold just 2 weeks earlier to someone using a false identity. The payment had been in cash, and no security cameras were present where the exchange took place. Still, the timing was too close to ignore. The investigation began to reveal that Raju's life, which looked perfect from the outside, had its share of enemies. Competing restaurant owners resented his dominance in the market. Former employees had grudges, especially those who claimed they were underpaid or unfairly dismissed. Then there were whispers of personal disputes, quiet breakups, legal threats, and one particular lawsuit involving a former manager named Ananya Rao. Years ago, she had accused Raju of exploitation, but the case was quietly settled, and she disappeared from public view. No one had seen her in years, but a rumor now suggested she was back in Chennai. Varun knew the investigation could not rely solely on physical evidence. In cases like this, motives were as important as the method. The presence of the rare herb pointed towards someone with deep culinary knowledge, possibly from within Raju's own circle, but the absence of the herb anywhere else hinted at a carefully planned, one-time. Whoever had done this had calculated every step: how to introduce the poison without leaving a trace, how to avoid detection on security cameras, and how to ensure that Raju would be the only person to consume the fatal dose. The mystery was tightening like a noose around those closest to him. Late that night, Varun stood alone in Raju's kitchen, looking at the spotless counters and gleaming cookware. The air no longer carried the faint, bitter smell from the day before, but he imagined the moment when the herb had been mixed into the meal. The act had been deliberate, almost surgical. This was not the work of an amateur, but of someone who had planned it long before that night. In that silence, Varun knew that the answer lay somewhere between the kitchen and the people who had passed through it, and one of them was hiding a truth that could unravel the entire empire of the Dosa King. You said, expand, Chapter 3. Her work often involved long nights, anonymous tips, and walking into places where danger felt uncomfortably close. When news of Raju Vardhan's death broke, she knew it was more than just the sudden passing of a successful businessman. There was something about the details, the secrecy, the strange herb, the absence of any clear suspect, that drew her in. Unlike the police, who were bound by official procedures, Meera could move freely, talk to people off the record, and look where others didn't want her to. She began her investigation by digging into Raju's history, piecing together a timeline of his career, his public appearances, and the controversies that had followed him. She soon found herself reading old newspaper clippings about a legal dispute that had made small headlines years earlier. It involved a woman named Ananya Rao, a former senior manager in one of Raju's flagship restaurants. According to the reports, she had accused Raju of exploitation and workplace harassment, demanding a significant settlement. The case had been abruptly closed, with no further details released, and Ananya had seemingly vanished afterward. Meera was intrigued. People didn't just disappear unless they wanted to, or unless someone wanted them gone. What made the matter more interesting was that a former colleague of Ananya claimed to have spotted her in Chennai just days before Raju's death. Determined to find her, Meera followed a trail of whispers that led to the city's outskirts, where rundown apartment blocks stood under the constant hum of electric wires. In one of these, she located a one-bedroom flat that matched the description she had been given. It looked abandoned at first, with curtains drawn tightly and no sound from inside. But a neighbor mentioned seeing a woman who fit Ananya's description, coming and going late at night, often carrying shopping bags. When Meera finally managed to gain access to the apartment through a contact, she found something that made her pulse quicken, a stack of old restaurant invoices and supply records neatly stored in a locked metal box. The documents revealed something that the public had never known. Several orders placed years ago for the banned herb Karunagra. The orders were made under a fake name but were billed to one of Raju's smaller restaurants that no longer existed. The quantities ordered were small, just enough for personal use, rather than commercial production, which raised more questions than answers. Why would a banned herb be ordered in such small amounts? And why keep the records hidden for so long? Meera's instincts told her she was staring at the root of the mystery, but she needed more. She decided to take photographs of every document before returning them exactly as she had found them. As she stepped out of the apartment complex into the dimly lit street, she felt the distinct sensation of being watched. Her eyes scanned the shadows between parked scooters and narrow alleyways, but she saw nothing. Still, the feeling didn't. The city seemed unusually silent at that moment, as if holding its breath. Meera quickened her pace, clutching her bag tightly against her side. Back at her small newsroom office, she laid out the photographs and began connecting the dots. The timing of the herb orders lined up with the period when Ananya's dispute with Raju had been at its peak. If Ananya had indeed ordered the herb, had she been planning something back then that never came to pass, or was someone else using her as a cover to get their hands on? The fact that she had resurfaced in Chennai shortly before Raju's death could not be ignored, but Meera also understood that she had now entered dangerous territory. The kind of people who dealt with banned substances, secret business dealings, and possible murder did not take kindly to outsiders digging into their affairs. As the night wore on, Meera noticed a shadow flitting past her office window more than once. Whether it was her imagination or not, she couldn't be sure. But one thing was certain, she was no longer just investigating a story. She was a part of it now, tangled in the same invisible web that had ensnared Raju and perhaps Ananya. And in that web, the lines between hunter and hunted were growing thinner by the hour. You said, expand, Chapter 4. The voice on the other end was calm, almost mechanical, offering just one clear statement. Look at Sahil Devraj's bank records. The line went dead before Varun could ask a single question. Acting quickly, he filed an urgent request for Sahil's financial history, and within hours, a disturbing pattern emerged. Large deposits had been made into Sahil's account over the past 6 months, each from an offshore bank registered under a shell company. The amounts were significant, far more than his chef's salary. There was no legitimate explanation Sahil could offer for such money, especially given the timing of the most recent deposit, just 2 days before Raju's death. When Varun confronted him with the evidence, Sahil broke. His shoulders sagged, his voice unsteady, and for the first time since the investigation began, he admitted to more than he had previously revealed. Yes, he had cooked Raju's final meal. Yes, he had been in the penthouse kitchen that night. But then he added something that shifted the narrative entirely. Raju had been the one to insist on making the dosa batter himself. For weeks before his death, Sahil claimed, Raju had been behaving strangely, pacing the kitchen late at night, checking ingredients obsessively, and avoiding certain dishes at public events. He told Sahil he suspected someone was trying to poison him, though he refused to say who. On the night in question, Raju prepared the batter in private, locking the kitchen doors, and sending Sahil out to fetch fresh curry leaves. By the time Sahil returned, the batter was already resting, and Raju seemed calmer. Sahil cooked the dosa as instructed, plated it, and left it on the table. He swore that he didn't see anyone else in the kitchen that night. The problem with Sahil's story was the autopsy report. Forensic analysis had confirmed that the banned herb had been added after the cooking process, not. That meant the poison could not have been mixed into the batter. It had to have been sprinkled or brushed onto the dosa after it was cooked and plated. This detail made Sahil's account incomplete at best, and suspicious at worst. If he wasn't the one who added the herb, then someone must have entered the kitchen or dining area in the narrow window of time between when he served the plate and when Raju began eating. But according to building security logs and camera footage, no one had entered the penthouse during that period. Varun began to suspect that the kitchen itself might not be the only place the contamination could have occurred. The dining area, connected to the open kitchen, was accessible from a service hallway that bypassed the main entrance. That hallway, normally locked, could be opened from the inside by anyone familiar with the layout. Raju's private staff would have known about it. Sahil, when asked about the hallway, claimed he had never seen anyone use it, but his hesitation before answering was telling. It was possible that the offshore payments were not for carrying out the murder directly, but for ensuring that someone else could do it without interference. Meanwhile, Varun's team dug deeper into Sahil's connections. They discovered that he had maintained quiet contact with several ex-employees, who had left Raju's restaurants on bad terms. One of those names was Ananya Rao. Phone records suggested a brief call between Sahil and Ananya, just 3 days before Raju's death. The content of the call couldn't be retrieved, but the timing was impossible to ignore. Whether they were co-conspirators or just tied together by circumstance was unclear, but the overlap in their histories with Raju made them both high-value suspects. As the night wore on, Varun reviewed the timeline over and over, mapping out every movement in the penthouse. The poison had been placed with precision. There were no accidental elements here, no carelessness, no panic. Whoever had done it knew exactly what they were doing, down to the minute. They had exploited Raju's paranoia, his habits, and his own need for control over his. In doing so, they had created the perfect crime scene, one that looked like an accident, or even an act of self-sabotage. But Varun was certain now that it was neither. The killer had been close, not in the shadows, but right within the warm glow of Raju's inner circle, and they had played their part so well that even the Dosa King himself had not seen them coming. You said, expand chapter 5, 6 ticks 50, words long, don't add any headings. ChatGPT said, the break in the case came unexpectedly, when Meera Nandakumar delivered a small USB drive to Inspector Varun Malhotra's office. She claimed to have obtained it through a private source connected to Raju's security company. On the drive were several hours of CCTV footage from cameras installed inside the penthouse, cameras that had somehow been overlooked during the initial investigation. Most of the recordings showed mundane activities, Raju walking between the living room and kitchen, Sahil preparing dishes, and housekeeping staff clearing tables. But one segment from the night of the murder froze Varun in his seat. At 9:47, the footage showed Ananya Rao entering the penthouse through the private service hallway, holding a small steel food container.
She was greeted by Raju himself, who smiled warmly and led her toward the dining area. The two disappeared from view for a few minutes, before Raju returned alone, setting the container on the sideboard. There was nothing overtly suspicious, but the timing placed her in the penthouse, just before the fatal meal. Varun's first thought was that this confirmed the theory many had suspected. Ananya had returned to take revenge on her former employer, but a closer examination of the footage revealed something unexpected. At 9:50, after Ananya had apparently left, another figure entered the frame, Meera herself. She moved with calculated precision, glancing briefly toward the camera before stepping into the dining area. Her hand reached toward the plate on the table, lingering for only a moment before she withdrew. Then she picked up a wine glass, swapped it with another on the sideboard, and walked out through the same service hallway Ananya had used. Her movements were quick, confident, and without hesitation, as if she had rehearsed them. The implications were staggering. Meera had been the one to handle the plate and the wine glass in the final minutes, before Raju began eating. Forensic analysis of the glass taken from the table confirmed the presence of Ananya's fingerprints, but there were none on the plate. That absence, combined with the CCTV footage, painted a chilling picture. The poison had been meant for Ananya. The plate she was to eat from had been contaminated, but Meera had switched it, ensuring Raju received it instead. Whether it was out of personal vendetta, financial desperation, or a calculated move to manipulate the outcome, only Meera knew. Varun replayed the footage several times, noting Meera's composure. She hadn't been afraid of being caught, which suggested she believed no one would ever see the recording. It explained why she had been so eager to involve herself in the investigation. Staying close allowed her to control the narrative and deflect suspicion. Digging into her background revealed a financial trail of collapsing investments and mounting debts. Her news agency, once a promising independent outlet, had been on the verge of bankruptcy. Records showed that she had approached Raju multiple times for financial backing, each time being refused. That refusal, coupled with her knowledge of his private affairs, may have been the final push toward a deadly plan. What made the case even more complex was Ananya's role. Interviews with her after the footage was revealed painted a murky picture. She admitted to reconciling with Raju in recent months, and claimed they had been planning to open a new restaurant together. She said the food container she carried that night held a sample recipe she wanted him to try. Her visit had been innocent, she insisted, and she left without knowing that anything was wrong. If she was telling the truth, then she had narrowly escaped a murder intended for her, a murder that claimed Raju's life instead. In the end, Varun made the decision to arrest Meera quietly. The case was too high profile, and its potential to damage the city's image as a culinary hub was enormous. Officially, the public would be told that the investigation had concluded with no foul play detected, attributing Raju's death to a sudden medical condition. Privately, Meera was taken into custody and charged under multiple counts, the evidence sealed away from public record. Ananya, shaken by the events, disappeared from Chennai once more, this time voluntarily, vowing never to return. For those who knew the truth, the story became something almost mythical, a cautionary tale whispered in kitchens and market stalls. The Dosa King had been brought down not by a business rival or a spurned employee, but by someone who had walked into his life under the guise of telling his story. The aroma of dosa in Chennai still filled the air every morning, but for those who remembered, it carried with it a faint, bitter undertone, the memory of a king's final meal, and the secrets that died with him.